Yeah, I mean, maybe it's okay. I mean, I had really thought about it today as just kind of like a check-in day and see, like, had people come up with like narrowed down ideas and gotten started or had gotten excited about starting any cataloging. So yeah, I think that's my question for the room. Like, has anybody decided to catalog anything?
I've made a few, but the one that I like the most is like a spreadsheet of available extra food that people have, and then like people who are able to transport that in case the people who have food aren't able to a food bank or to the other people who need the food. So a way to like list yourself as available to transport food and what your availability is and like where you can do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've been doing like the local pantry here in the weekends, and it functions. I mean, it's exactly that sharing network. It's exactly what it is. But it's a kind of an amazing. I wish I had it. It's in my car, but there's an amazing Excel sheet that's related to it. That it's all like color coded based on, you know, everything from like, you know, food types to driver routes to like particular conditions, number of people in the family, how to, you know, but it's like, yeah, there's an amazing sort of like catalog associated with it. I also saw this thing yesterday that was like a neighborhood fridge, and it's literally a fridge outside in somebody's like porch that is like plugged into the home. And there were like just like an overstock of things. I don't really know what the network serving that was, but I found it to be, you know, in line with the things that we're like thinking about.
That might have been the one in Oakland where I live. I think a couple people just set up refrigerators.
West Oakland, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
West Oakland.
Yeah, and you can go and drop off food or go pick it up.
That's great. Yeah. So can I say another little story about that? Like, I think last time somebody was like, I don't know if it was here or in another conversation that I had, but something about like, well, I don't want to dumpster dive. Maybe David, was it you, David? I don't know. Like somebody was like, oh, I don't want to dumpster dive for this, but something. Maybe it was in a different conversation, but I used to live in Austin, Texas, where the Whole Foods distribution center is. And it's the largest distribution for all of Whole Foods in the US. They only have like 3, so they are very big and they serve a huge radius. Now it's probably changed. This was like 7 years ago. But we actually created a relationship with the night guard at the distribution center. And because it's the distribution center, not the store, anything that happens to a pallet, so not to a box or not to an item, which would be the sort of scale of the grocery store, but in a distribution center, if anything happens to a single item in a pallet, the whole pallet has to go. So say like if a peanut butter jar breaks, now that entire pallet is potentially contaminated or potentially like not sellable to stores. So we would literally go back up our truck and pick up thousands of dollars of peanut butter, thousands of dollars of the like $4 kombucha, like the real, like the ones that you feel like really fancy when you're like, I'm gonna splurge, I'm gonna get that kombucha because I'm like feeling sick today or whatever. Like that was like pick like sometime, and so then we had to kind of create a little bit of a network, an unofficial network, where we had a few households on call, like where there to be like so much of one thing that we couldn't fill it up, that they would then come there and pick up the extra. And we would do this like routes of like dropping off like Christmas packet goodies in like people's porches. Anyway, but distribution center versus like store, as a source of inventory is quite a thing. Sorry, super anecdotal.
It's just interesting, like the kind of legality behind, not the legality, but the rules and the systems behind these things that permit that to happen. And you know, we I don't think Ezra's here, but Ezra was one of my students, and we went to Detroit, and we were looking at a food bank in Detroit, and you know, they were giving away food which was closer to its expiration date, if not kind of recently expired. And I found it interesting how they said, like, you know, they weren't policed in the same way that the grocery store was policed because of the system in which they were kind of exchanging it with. And you know, I wonder if you just put a pallet of peanut butter on your front lawn, like, you know, if someone gets sick of that peanut butter, what then happens? And that's maybe an American perspective, and that's sort of this litigation kind of world that we find ourselves in. Like, how long do these things last? Because of, you know, the just there's something that always potentially goes wrong in these things, and that's the unfortunate part of these systems that we're imagining. So I don't know if I have a thought or conclusion about that, but just it makes me think about all the different kind of rules that are keeping these things in play. Like when I was in New York, we would get lots of free food from stores at, you know, at midnight or 1 o'clock when we were working late in the studio, because they were just, at the moment it touches the street, it becomes public property. And then there's like a different kind of rule of rights, but in different cities it becomes illegal then to touch garbage. And it's just funny, like all those different rules that control those things.
I mean, just to address it, sort of like Luz's idea a little bit more directly. I mean, I know that the pantry here, essentially, like once you sign up to receive that food, there's a kind of like an accreditation process. It's pretty official. That I think it's pretty intense for the receiver of the food to both sign up for the ability to receive that food, but in that they like, they like sign away, like they're like suing rights to the pantry, which is both, I mean, it's incredibly problematic, as well as that's cooked into any contract of participating in anything or receiving any kind of help or welfare, that you can't sue but again, it would also be messed up if you could sue, right? Like that would be like this kind of the underpinning of what makes the US like this kind of place of fear, I guess, constant fear. But yeah, I think like Lucy, I think for you it would be interesting, like how does the community that it serves, or how does whoever, not community, like whoever it serves, how do they self-select into the system in order to have there be like disclosure on the source of the food, the condition of the food, and it's like a personal buy-in as opposed to, I think that would be key, that it's like, you know, one chooses to be part of that network. So for like the dumpster stuff, we would just like, it was just we had identified like friends' homes, like homes in which like really was just friends of ours, which is both kind of problematic, but also, yeah, like we didn't want to be in the business of making anybody sick that we couldn't. So how might your network self-select is interesting. Have you had any thoughts about that, or how? Yeah.
Not about that specifically, but how I have it set up right now is there's just a place to list food, and then to list yourself as available for transportation, and then there's contact information. So if people need food, they don't have to like put their self on this public spreadsheet. They can just contact like a transportation person individually. And maybe that takes away some of the privacy issues, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of like just the, you know, I don't know if it's a myth these days or actually happened, but you know, knocking on your neighbor's door and asking for 2 eggs or a bit of sugar, you know, but it's more of a networked version of that, which is a little larger than just the person next to you. It's quite nice to think about that as kind of a, I don't know, as an inspiration of where this evolves from.
Also, this whole sourdough thing, right? Like, in a way, like all of a sudden everybody was just like, both like there was almost like a 2-step to the sourdough loaf during COVID. Like there was something about like showing that you did this thing and being proud of this thing, and then being like, the second post would be like, okay, now I have extra bread. Who needs like, you know, who like needs some. But yeah, I wonder about sort of like cooked food, or like the muffin tray that new neighbors come in with when you first move in. Isn't that a kind of suburban myth too?
I think it's interesting that we're kind
I
of
wish it
we're
wasn't.
here. Yeah, we're here inventing this kind of technological solutions to problems that we generated in large part as spatial practitioners in conceiving the cities that don't allow for that kind of encounter. So I think that's also interesting. Of, you know, especially thinking of a city like suburbs, like where I guess you then live, or like LA, which I know a little bit better. But really, I think it's just impossible to have any sort of chance to meet your neighbors. So that's why we need to invent these new formats, no? I think it has a lot to do with the physical space somehow. And maybe it's not a direct relation, but it's in terms of how that informs our behaviors. And I think it goes from generation to generation. So now where I am at now, my parents' place, I don't think I need any sort of tool. I can walk like 3 meters and then shout to my neighbor and ask them for anything. And that's what I do actually. But it's just, the city is just different. It's like completely different. And
Are you
I
in
think
Berlin?
it's interesting
Is that
also
what you said?
to realize. What is that?
Are you in Berlin? Is that what you said the other day?
No, I'm in
Berlin?
Italy
No.
now. I'm in Italy now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I have a memory of being younger and going to my neighbors and asking for, I think it was flour. I mean, it was something baking related. And then I remember when that changed, because a sort of corner shop opened. That wasn't very close, but it was like a 10-minute walk. So it also wasn't very far. And as soon as the corner shop opened, the need to go and ask to borrow something was replaced by just being able to go buy it. And since then, we've never asked for anything again. But the like culture of bringing food over to people's homes is still, for me, quite present, but it's only with people you know, or you know, have, if something has happened to them or something.
So I feel like there's like this idea of necessity then kind of involved with all these like ways of looking at it. Because I know growing up in the suburbs, we really never exchanged anything with anyone because everybody had their own. And then now living in the city in a smaller apartment, you come in contact with like other people who live in the apartment a lot more. Also, like my space is smaller, so I know I was cataloging like household appliances because I just thought, kind of looking at like the neighbor scale of like, you know, it's a 1-bedroom apartment, so there's only so much room to have only so many things. So it really matters like what you have. But then also like during this coronavirus, like cooking so much, baking so much, I've noticed that I would have like, you know, it'd be nice to have a different appliance, or I don't have something I need. So if it's more like exchanging even like a blender or a juicer with someone else in the building, that's how I was kind of looking at it. And then, you know, on the subject of like necessities, it's like, well, I think because we're so close in an apartment, and even with like the pandemic going on, it feels a little bit like more like closed off, just the apartment. Because we run into people in the halls, like it's a little more than when I go home, when I visit my parents, everybody's so separated. No one really, like I said, no one really needs anything. So it's kind of like based on, I guess, scale and size, and then what could be necessary. But yeah, I guess the kitchen appliances is what I kind of started cataloging. Because I've noticed at times I've been like, oh, I could use a juicer, but I don't have a juicer. But why would I buy a juicer for one thing when someone else in the building might have one? Then that would be an interesting use of like a shared catalog.
So you've been focusing kind of on those appliances. Have they gravitated more towards kind of cooking appliances or general appliances in the house, like a vacuum or something?
I started with like cooking appliances just because I do a lot of cooking and I'm very like particular about that stuff. And I thought it was interesting like to think about it also in a way of like what I would lend or what I would trade or then even what I would keep. Like I have a KitchenAid mixer, which is kind of like, it was my graduation gift. And it's kind of like my, like really important to me. So it's like something like that I wouldn't necessarily like give away, but if someone needed to use it, you know, I would be willing to lend it. But then for example, like a coffee maker, like a Mr. Coffee maker, those are $10. So I've lended, you know, but at the same time, something like that, it's like you use on a daily basis. So there's another factor to it of like how much something is being used, how often it's used, how important is it. Yeah, just a couple thoughts on that.
KitchenAids are expensive. I like, my sister has one and I live with my sister, and I remember asking her what was the most expensive thing in her kitchen, and she said the KitchenAid, and I was kind of taken aback by it because it's sort of, it feels like you pay too much for what it really does.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe not. But can completely relate to wanting a juicer and not ever, you know, going to buy something like that. But if somebody else had it, it would be so nice. Just to like once a week, you know, want some carrot juice or something.
But appliances are expensive. I know, like I've gotten into like other hobbies, like I did like DJing and stuff. So I had like, you know, the equipment and all that stuff's really expensive. And for just trying to get interested in something, you know, or learning something, you know, whether it be like a guitar or a piano or a keyboard, you know, if it's something that could be just like shared without having to buy it first and then learn it or learn if you like doing it. Yeah, because appliances can get pretty expensive or appliance-like things.
I really wish Tarini's microphone worked because she's been bringing up a lot of great examples in the chat and mentioned them before in the other conversations. So I'm just going to read out what she wrote here. There's an active exchange of homegrown fruits in my neighborhood, mangoes being the most common since this area used to be a mango grove before, also some berries and some herbs. So for those who don't know, Tarini is in Chandigarh and has always said that it's quite a lush kind of area. And I find this idea of not only a food exchange, but a food exchange that is from things that are produced from your own backyard even more interesting. So it's not just like, oh, I bought all this stuff and now I have excess of it, so here I'm giving it away, but like these mangoes are everywhere, let's give them away. There's a project.
There's a, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I'm gonna try to find the link and put it up there, but there's a project in Los Angeles where they did something very similar with all of the fruit trees in Los Angeles, which were kind of like in public territory, and they went through maps where they all were. Fallen fruit, thank you, Nick.
That's right. Yeah.
And they mapped where they all were, and then had kind of jam parties where, I mean, they gave the maps out and said, if you want this at this time of the year, you could probably find, you know, oranges here. But then they also had throughout the year moments where they would find those excess fruits and then make jams together as a group and then give them out to everyone.
So I was actually thinking of a different one, not fallen fruit, but there's actually, I'm type here, there's falling fruit, which is another similar thing. I don't know why they just had ending, but that's actually an app, and it's kind of a worldwide. I'm not sure. I mean, it's like, I think they cover like nationally or globally, and it's kind of not forum based. How would I say? Like people can just upload if they see something, or they can like mark that, you know, there's a tree in their area. And then through the app you can find it, and then it gives a little description. So if you did travel somewhere and you wanted to see what, you know, your what was near you in, say, like Florida or something, you could use that app. It's not very useful for where I am, because in Wisconsin we don't have a lot of like fruit trees or, you know, really like public bushes or anything for like for food. But yeah, similar concept. But I know there, you can get an app on your phone.
It's interesting. A friend of mine's mum works, or she says has orientated her practice around foraging in Cape Town. And the way that she sort of thinks about the process, I find really intriguing, because often she acquires the knowledge on what can be eaten from sort of local witch doctors, sort of like traditional knowledge sources. And then there's this ethical question about who owns that knowledge and who can exploit that knowledge. So she sort of takes it upon herself for very personal reasons to sort of access and find out, and also to sort of re-educate anybody that she speaks to about how she's sort of inventing different ways of using these foods, which are literally just available on the side of the road, but nobody really knows whether they can be eaten first of all, and what they can be used for, whether it's medicine or whether it's something to consume. And then how she sort of has all of these tensions with sort of larger, more sort of dominating official bodies wanting to sort of, take on that knowledge and then use it without necessarily crediting the people that it comes from. And it's just fascinating, all the sort of dialogue around it. So it's sort of like, I've never thought of foraging from that point of view before.
There's an unfortunate kind of, I don't know, there's an unfortunate kind of outcome of some of these systems. Like, for example, couch surfing, which is a shared network of free spaces to host and stay. You know, that idea became commercialized into Airbnb, right? And now Airbnb is kind of this global capital project. I heard a story of someone who invented Uber, went to Cuba and saw that out of necessity, everyone was sharing cars and driving each other around because they needed to, and because it was sort of a state mandate that there's not enough cars to go around for everyone, so we have to kind of help each other out. And then, you know, they went to Cuba, saw that, and then turned that into a money-making kind of project. So there are these unfortunate kind of outcomes for all these things where, wow, that looks great, that works really well. How can I monetize it? And I don't know, whatever. This conversation is quite expansive, what we're having, but it's always interesting to also see how there's potential ways to kind of put in roadblocks to preventing that from happening.
Yeah, definitely. I think in some way, like that, I mean, the the current economy, or like the current kind of, you know, economic model tied to certain kind of tech innovations that are coming out of like Silicon Valley are the sharing economy, like WeWork, right? Like it's fundamentally based on a kind of idea that on paper could have had a benign origin, one that it was not so tied to, yeah, like kind of profit. But like what's wrong with like identifying sort of loose square footage and renting it out in like in a city? But then it just becomes, through some of these like tech tools, they become like behemoths, and I think then it becomes a bit more problematic. So here, like, yeah, how can a kind of identification of like, I think Rebecca, you were saying last time, like what does it subvert, or like what does it take advantage of, and for who, is pretty key. Yeah.
Anybody else been working on catalogs, maybe outside of food or kitchen appliances?
I was thinking about doing like school supplies, because there's a school in my neighborhood and there's a lot of kids that live around here. I'm not sure if they're going back to school like in the fall, but I think it would be kind of useful to either like donate or lend out like extra supplies that we have, because I have 3 siblings and like they're all older than me, so they're not in school anymore. So we've accumulated like so many school supplies over the last like decade, and we just like have them in like the storage room just in case. But I feel like at this point there's like no need for them in our house. So I think it'd be like kind of nice to see if anybody like in the neighborhood needs them, or like just in the school, just to donate them there. So that's what I've been like looking at stuff in my house to see what we have.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Hello, everyone. So I was looking into the construction materials that we certainly use to renovate our houses, or maybe just to build something new. So like there have been a lot of instances when we buy something, maybe just to paint our houses, or varnishes, or maybe some extra tiles that are leftovers after the construction has been done. So a lot of things has been thrown away, and they are like uh, which I have seen in India. So people, they have a habit of throwing away that stuff on the roads and or somewhere, and that has been picked up by the dumpsters. So I think a lot of energy like it's been put into like creating these materials and everything, and we can certainly have an exchange, like cataloging of such materials. I don't know how this thing could work, or it could be feasible, because the requirement of the quantity may vary from person to person. But I think we can some amount of it can be certainly used in different places.
Yeah, I find that so interesting, especially with reference to what Crystal was suggesting, and how art supplies could be shared with education platforms. And there's something about the construction industry for me. I mean, my mind immediately goes to paint, because I have memories of working with paint on a site and having excess, but not knowing what to do with it, and knowing that substance is so toxic. And not even knowing where to dispose of it. This was specifically in Thailand. And I just sort of pictured like all these leftover bits of paint in a catalog, and thinking, oh, that would be like an artist's dream, or it would maybe be like a preschool teacher would have a really, good idea to use something like that. But then obviously there's so many other materials that are left out. And then it would be about how to share that catalog with potential sort of users, and they might range.
This practice, which is based in Belgium, I shared a link on the chat, and they work all around cataloging building materials for exactly this purpose. So they go on demolition sites, and they also figure out a different economic model where they have kind of a construction company. They work like contractors, and they have a huge warehouse where they can store all these materials that are kind of not used in the particular project, but still somehow useful for someone else. And then they can share this growing catalog. And what they're trying to do, which I find very interesting, is that they want to shorten the kind of links, and potentially, instead of using the warehouse, going directly from one demolition site to one construction site. And that's also super exciting. And of course, it only works if the catalog is precise. So if there's like proper surveying and analysis of each material. So that's I think that's very exciting as a possible use of this kind of tool.
Yeah, storage is fascinating as well for that reason.
Yeah, we in Milwaukee we used to have a architectural like salvage store. We also have like the Restore, which is a branch of Goodwill that has more building supplies, appliances, tools, stuff like that. It's all sold at a really like discounted price because it's donated and salvaged. And then there's also was a Milwaukee salvage kind of center, which people would donate, or they would go out into the community and go to maybe, condemned buildings or buildings that the city had bought, but then they were looking to sell, and would basically strip the places, the homes, whatever, and reuse or then resell that material again at a discounted price to people. But if they didn't go in and, strip them, they would have been basically just destroyed, taken to a dump, whatever. So it was also a way of like kind of preserving some history, architectural history, and saving some things that you can't like, get in a typical hardware store, millwork. So kind of similar. They weren't cataloged very well, or they had like the store was set up in different areas, but there was no catalog to reference. And they actually shut down about a year ago for some reason. I'm not totally sure. I think they just didn't have the funding to support the business, which is too bad because it was the only place like that in our city.
Yeah, often the land or the cost of storage outweighs what you could earn on salvage materials. I worked with a theatre company here in London that does sort of immersive theatre experiences for autistic children. And they've been working for about 3 years, and they had to dispose of so many materials just because they were a really small business and they couldn't afford storage. And she brought me on board because she wanted to rethink that whole sort of production process. She was like, I can't throw all these things away, but I have to almost understand how one project can then lead to another project and how they can be linked through an exchange or sort of an extended period of use of the materials, which sort of requires a very different way of approaching the design to begin with. And one of the conclusions was it was worth spending money on storage because there would then be costs saved on all of these things that they were buying for each and every initiative.
I think prior to going into architecture, I used to do sort of like sets and props for touring musicians, and the fact that they were touring meant that they needed to be oftentimes flat packed or disassembled, so they would have to be able to kind of just like puff up and, you know, like be a substantial amount of material that could be present in a stage, but then like sort of travel with them in a van. So that then like has completely informed how I do architecture, how I propose architecture, and like I only do sort of like design for disassembly, right? Like just anything that can be, again, another sort of thing that has been completely co-opted and capitalized, the idea of flat packing and reducing into parts. But then I also only deal with like whole sizes. So I never cut anything to like 1/4 of an inch, or like my tolerance is like, tends to be like a whole inch or a whole 1/2 foot for like the sort of bigger dimensions. So it's never like 27 1/8 or, you know, 27 1/4. It's always like 30 feet or 30 1/2, you know, or 30 plus a 1/2 foot item. Yeah, it's and that process too is, so much of it has to do in avoiding storage, which at the budgets that architectural projects work in, there's that's one, it's never part of the grant. Two, it's never part of the funding initially, and then it's almost like an invisible expense that one is supposed to like absorb. So yeah, I'm with you there, Rebecca, on that experience.
It's really tough designing with no waste though, especially when your budgets are extremely limited, because unfortunately to do things cheaply, you do things with like cheap Amazon orders.
Yeah.
And they are really cheap and you can keep things really low, but as soon as you're trying to sort of develop interesting details or sort of rethink, it takes more time, and it often requires materials that are more expensive. It's really, really hard.
Yeah, I'm also curious about the tool side of it, where you know, if you use the materials as is, you won't need to necessarily then invest or find the tools required to cut the pieces. You know, I do find it funny though that most walls are 10 feet tall. Domestic walls are like 10 feet tall, but a sheet of plywood is 8 feet. So you always have that 2 foot gap that you have to figure out what to do with. And it's just like, couldn't we design a sheet of plywood that maybe is 5 feet, and then we wouldn't have this excess of waste, you know? So it's an exchange that goes both ways, I think, in terms of the dimensions of their kind of origins, and also the dimensions of the space that we need. And yeah, it's difficult. I think that's something that I always try to think about in terms of designing. It's like, okay, what are the pieces as we get them off the shelf, and what is the minimal amount of manipulations we have to do to them to keep them kind of as in their original state, or without producing much waste. Because what I see so often is just design, and then you're like, okay, I want to make this thing that I designed real, and the amount of waste that goes into producing that thing without kind of switching those lines, where instead of thinking, like, you could think about what are the materials you have first and what do you do with them, rather than what do you want to make and what are the materials you need to find to make that. And I think those are two kind of contradictory takes. And, you know, not to point out any fingers here, but I think we learned from our last workshop in the desert, especially, like, you know, there was kind of, let's just work with what we have, and there was not a lot of waste produced. And then there was another project which was, this is what we have to make, and the amount of waste that we produced from that. And it was kind of really sad because of that approach. Anyways, I think, I mean, I'd like to share maybe what I was thinking about too. Before Satellite Lab got really busy, I got a message from my friend on Instagram about some random book exchange chain, which I find these things kind of funny, where it's like, you know, share your address with someone, and then they'll send it to 20 other people, and they'll send it to 20 other people, and you'll get this kind of naturally occurring book exchange, almost like a
But it just becomes a spam email.
Spam email and you can read right through it. And I was wondering, I still want to share my books, because I have, now that I'm at home and kind of going through, as everyone's kind of said, going through all of their stuff. I have all these excess books that I want to give away or figure out a way to exchange them. And to me, it's like, I know the items, I know the catalog, but I don't know the exchange system. I don't know how to actually facilitate that. So I was thinking maybe find a flat pack box, and then use that and then put the system on the box. And so every time the box can be reused and there's instructions on the box as it goes from one person to the next, or I don't know, somehow almost like a library card where you pull out the library card and you get to see who had it last. Some form of system to make it more than just, I got my book and now I have it, I don't know. But I was also, just because I have to teach this Grasshopper course, I was making these students figure out with me how to read an Excel sheet. So I put all the dimensions of the books and I took pictures of the books, and now we have them all in Rhino, from Grasshopper, of all the books and the sizes of the books in this Excel sheet. So you can live update the Excel sheets and the books will be updated on Rhino. So I'm interested to see how that grows.
The live updates on the Excel sheet will show up in Rhino?
Yeah.
That's great.
I mean, obviously if Grasshopper's open and everything, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the way to make the dimensions of the book like necessary to the exchange would be like if you picked one of these like sort of like USPS prepaid boxes, and like the sort of the price of exchanging it, the price of exchanging the book or passing on the book becomes exactly the price of the postage, right? So like that, like the fulfillment show in that way, where you just kind of like limit it to a budget, a size driven budget of postage. Is that what you're saying? Like actually using the mail? Yeah,
I mean, because the one thing that I always get sad about with like kind of these Amazon boxes is it's a one-time use, and so you get the box, you open it up, and then you throw the box away, unless you're my dad, who has a whole eBay business of just repurposing every box he has and selling. Yeah.
I mean, I think like I mean, since it's like since like the outside of the box is like the USPS domain. What if like the inside of the box got like this sort of like, somehow like you put a sticker on with your name or something, or you were able to kind of reach in with a pen and like sign it or something, and then like, I don't know, someday in the future the box gets undone and you can see like a kind of whole history of who read it, or something. There's something about the kind of taking the inside of the box as the space of accumulated information, or like the stickers on top with the address, I don't know. Yeah.
I was a big reader when I was younger, and I always liked going to the library and then seeing what was that called, when they would stamp the like last like checkout of the book, whatever that was called. I mean, they don't do that anymore. But I always liked seeing that because I'd like seeing like who or how many people were taking the book out. There's one book that I would always take out that I was the only one that ever took that book out. And it was just kind of interesting to see like the catalog and just like what it was like, the life of the book kind of ish in the front of it, just like the stamp. So I like that idea of something that's just very like can be added to over time.
Every now and again in London, you can find just sort of like gifted books. And there is a little bit of an expectation that if you pick up a gifted book, you then leave one of your own books somewhere else. And aesthetically, they're always wrapped. So it doesn't look like somebody just left behind their book. It's wrapped and there's like sort of a clear indication that this is to give away and it's for somebody to take, a stranger to take. which I find really interesting, and just in terms of the way that the aesthetics play into how comfortable people feel sort of accepting a gift from a stranger. And then my other thought is just that postal services are so different all over the world. You're lucky to have a really good one in the US, and also in the UK here where I am now. It's so reliable and everybody uses it. Switzerland as well, like people would send letters more frequently than writing emails. But that's not the case everywhere. It's just, yeah.
I'm going to read Tarini's message. There's a new one. I was thinking more in the direction of getting into new hobbies, or maybe sharing to develop more interest in a particular area. Some of the ideas I had were music instruments. I have flutes and a couple of mouth organs. I got because I thought I could play them, but never got around to it, and eventually lost interest as well. So I wouldn't mind lending them. Same with gym or sports equipment like weights or rackets. Another thing would be lending children storybooks I just kept for the lovely illustrations. I'm sure there'd be lots of books on many subjects circulating, since we all got professors here living in the uni campus. One thing that happens here every year is the main uni library throws away lots of books with surplus copies. It's an opportunity for all people to also give away books they don't want or can't keep anyway, and for them to pick up new ones completely free of cost. It's a major giveaway of sorts. Yeah, all very interesting. It really seems to always come back to the catalog itself, and how the catalog is used as an exchange system, or at least communicated as an exchange system.
I'm still really interested in the internal library, the internal lab library. Maybe Danny, if this Excel sheet is quite efficient, maybe we could all add our books to that. And then I think how we share is something still to be questioned. I mean, yeah, and also it's interesting to question what books you would add, sort of what books you feel that the group would have collective interest in. Like, would they, I don't know if it would be novels, maybe it would be architecture books or theory books, or things that I feel other people would want to perhaps integrate in their own practices. Yeah.
How do you feel about I mean, if we share books, what's the balance between piracy and sharing? What do you think about that?
I mean, I don't care. I just think.
Me neither, but it's just I don't know. I was just rising a more general discussion.
I mean, I find this really interesting that you can take a physical book, post it all over the world, or post it all over a country, and it's not plagiarism. But as soon as you upload it and share it via the internet, it's plagiarism. But I think we could bypass that, or sort of like maybe find a loophole by just sharing that resource amongst ourselves. And maybe with trust, or, if it goes a bit beyond the lab, that's totally fine as well. I mean, it makes me think of what's that website, Danny, where I have to ask you to mine all my academic texts from?
I'm not allowed to tell you because I'll be arrested if I do.
I mean, I don't know how it works, but essentially it's a same sort of thing.
Well, it doesn't really exist much anymore because it's been literally kind of policed out of existence. But it's called.
It exists. It exists in Europe, I think.
There's like 5 A's, AAAAARG.fail. And you can't access it in the US. You can access it if you use a VPN that's rerouting you from the Netherlands. But it's just basically a space where everyone's uploaded, I think this is really interesting because you're saying essentially what happens in classrooms where your professor will give you PDF scans from a book. That then was turned into a more of a global system where you'll go on to ARG and you'll get all of these scanned PDFs of books. and which are shared with everyone, and they're usually academic essays or academic writings, or you know, there's kind of an art and architecture base to specifically ARG. But I think now, during COVID, you're seeing a lot of libraries actually stepping up and saying, you know what, guys, like, forget these paywalls. Here it is. I think that the LA libraries have been doing that. There's a couple of other examples maybe. But in the question of piracy, and it's piracy, Rebecca, not plagiarism.
Whoops.
Plagiarism is different. But I mean, I would just say, like, be aware of the publisher, be aware of the distributor, and, you know, kind of what their, I don't know what their politics are in some way. I'm not saying, like, I don't know, pick and choose, but be careful who you're disenfranchising by sort of stealing certain books, right?
But then is it okay to post them all over? Like, for me, it's the same thing. But it's as soon as there's a digital copy, it's considered in a totally different light.
I don't have an answer to that. I mean, if you were a school and you're showing a DVD during Thanksgiving break for some movie, you have to technically have the rights to show that to a crowd. You know, it's not that just because you have the physical copy, you're allowed to share it with whoever you want. You still need permission to share that. If you want to play music in a store, you need the rights to play that music in the store, even if you own the song yourself. You know, there's kind of these weird legalities on it all.
But do we agree with all of those legalities?
I think there's a lot of it is in the intentions of the author. No, I think many of these authors don't really care about the commercial side of the work, especially if they're researchers. Like they're paid by university. Like the book has a cost because the publisher needs to make money. So I don't know. I think it's different from a movie or from a song. That's what I think. It's like academic papers. You know, people don't make money out of academic papers, but then some repositories like what is that? The big one, like JSTOR, is it called? They ask you for a subscription. You know, so it's like, but the author is not taking the money from it, I guess. So I don't know. I think it's a difference between knowledge and entertainment, if there is any such difference.
I've always related to it really personally. I've always felt that there are things I really want to support financially, but I'm just not in a place to do so, especially at the moment where I'm like barely able to pay my rent. And I've always thought, you know, and I have sort of done this in times where I've had money coming in, I react very differently to sort of avenues to contribute towards. And I think there are so many people in the world who just cannot enter those systems in the same way, and yet they're not considered. And like, I feel like I go in and out in different ways, obviously, but right now it would be great to have access to some extra reading material, and I can't afford to buy it myself right now. But maybe in a year or 2 years' time, I will be sort of able to buy myself a book, and then I'll think about it a bit differently.
That happened with me. I read the Game of Thrones, or the first 3 books originally, because someone I know gave me the PDFs of them. He just like shared a folder that he got from somewhere, and he like sent them to me basically. And then I wanted to reread all the way through the series. So a few years later, I went and I bought them because I could then buy them, something similar. Like I couldn't afford them at first, or like, you know, it just didn't work out. But it was really weird to then like, again, it's like that. Yeah, it's like illegally downloading music and then buying the album to support the artist. Kind of, it's a weird. It's wrong, but it's like you want to be supportive, you want to contribute, but sometimes if you're not able to or don't have access to something, do you then yeah, do you then just like, yeah, it's a hard situation to be in.
And the law doesn't really describe or support these nuances. There's a right or a wrong. There isn't always an in-between.
I mean, I know we said we're not, it's hard to compare this to music and movies, but like when I was younger, I was a big torrent kind of person, downloading music from torrents, and I had a BitTorrent site which was only uploading music which was from RIAA. I think it's the RIAA, like music which is not on that list, which is kind of protected by the Recording Industry Association agency, whatever it stands for, right? And so all the labels made a conscious choice not to be kind of connected with the Recording Industry Agency, because there's other kind of mafia style things that they do, and they wanted to actually have, you know, more of an open label. So the only music that was allowed to be kind of illegally downloaded was music which kind of qualified outside of that threshold. So I think there are all these kind of boundaries which can be pushed and pulled, and that's why I always say, like, look at the distributor, look at the person holding that content in the first place. Like you said, with the schools, you write all these academic papers, but it's the university who publishes them, and it's the university who has those kind of I don't know, those agreements with the then groups that distribute the reading. So there's so many complications, and I think we're kind of going down many random rabbit holes. I kind of want to bring it back also because we're reaching the hour here, and just, I don't know, I think this is a great discussion. I think it opens up many things, but just maybe to bring it back to the kind of intent of the workshop, to make sure we're all kind of staying on that track, is this catalog, right? And Laida, I don't know if you want to add anything to it, but I mean, I would encourage everybody to look through the tutorials that Laida made. There's a lot of really great kind of ways to take 3D models quickly and make GIFs out of them, so the images themselves are a bit more dynamic. And I think a lot of this is just the visual access, you know, like Craigslist exists because it's so dumb in its visual aesthetics, but also it's not accessible for everyone. So I think questioning the aesthetics behind these catalogs is also very important in how we kind of make our own visual catalogs.
Yeah, I think oftentimes the kind of the written word can be a bit of a downfall in some methods of communicating the catalog. So tutorials are there to kind of make these documentations of objects, like maybe, I don't know, if the, yeah, documentations of the objects a little bit more like easily multi-dimensional or easily 3D, like starting from like flat onto and just giving them a little bit of, like, by extruding them, giving them a little bit of thickness, so that they communicate like things like scale and color, without having to say, like, write down the sizes, which we all know, like, you know, living across the world, we have different systems. Like, there's this phenomena, you know, that started happening once, like, e-commerce sort of exploded, where people were ordering, like, they thought they were ordering like a tent so they could go camping, and it ended up being like a dollhouse tent, right? Because, like, you're not as motivated to read the sort of like written word when it's like the specification. It's like 3 inches. Like, well, if I'm buying it from Spain and I don't have a readily available sense of what 3 inches is, I might prefer to kind of look at the object, like sort of slightly rotating, or the object next to something that gives it scale. So, I mean, I think the sharing network is interesting because it makes, it was kind of the cooked into, like, I cooked that into the workshop in order to, for those that were like interested in like engaging outside of like that COVID threshold again, that maybe like it could be like a different way of looking at your neighborhood that wasn't, or like at your immediate surrounding of like your community without having to, through a variety of options, through email or through flyers that didn't necessarily require contact. But if that is like, if that's bogging down the workshop and you're like eager to just kind of make a small catalogs of objects, I would encourage you to just kind of look through the tutorials and just like start to document a few things. It's the kind of thing that once you have like 10 items, it just like feels like a thing, right? Like, so the catalog, the minute it becomes like a pattern, and that's like a representationally self-similar way of documenting objects, the same way of kind of logging them into an Excel. By the 10th object, you're kind of feel like you've created a mini library of sorts. And so there's something that kind of happens when it aggregates, that it becomes a thing in itself. So if the idea of the network is a more difficult place to start, I would just kind of lean on the tutorials on the representation of cataloging anything that you might be excited about. So yeah, it could be like plants in your neighborhood or whatever it is. But don't let this sort of idea of the network, like the fact that it's difficult to imagine how to get in touch with your neighbors right now, like paralyze you. Just sort of catalog something, whatever is like fun. It doesn't also need to be like so it doesn't need to be like existential in a way. It could just be like, what's your excuse to step off the computer and like play scavenger in your own home or play scavenger in your neighborhood, you know?
Super. I love it. I mean, I love the ideas that we've already come up with, and I'm curious for those who haven't shared thoughts to keep it going and maybe write some stuff out in the Discord, what you're thinking about, and see how these things evolve. As always, you guys know the plan is tomorrow we will hear from our inspirational interlude, which is Nanu. And I'll send everyone the information and the links right after this chat. And then on Friday we meet back and we look at some of the results. So it'd be good for everyone to try to aim for, just like Laida said, just even if it's 10 objects, just aim for some sort of start on a catalog that we can start sharing those visual results. Cool.
I forgot to say I'm gonna be doing it too, and I'm gonna be cataloging plants and clippings and small propagations of the ones that I have, so I can like give away or exchange, including seeds and like baby plants. So that's my choice. That's what I'm doing this week.
Awesome, exciting.
Cool. All right, so see everybody tomorrow. Is that, yeah?
Yep. Okay, guys. Thanks again. See you soon.
Thank you.